Some of the exciting new features in Sublime Text 4 relate to solving problems that people commonly have when using Python from Sublime Text. Those are now resolved. Unfortunately, the way that this is resolved can sometimes, for some people, cause other less common problems. Fortunately, though, those problems are very easy to diagnose and very easy to fix, and today I'm going to show you how. Hello fellow Sublime Text fanatics, Oda and Nerd here, and welcome to this week's video where we're going to be talking about fixing problems that you might have running Python programs in Sublime Text 4 that you didn't have using Sublime Text 3. Now there's some very common problems that people have using Python from Sublime Text historically, and Sublime Text 4 resolves those problems. However, these fixes could potentially cause a small number of people that are using Python in a slightly different way, or different versions of Python, from using the built-in build system. So you might find that what used to work for you doesn't work anymore. And today we're going to show you why that's the case and how you can very easily fix your problem. Now, in order to fix this, we do need to know a little bit about build systems, but not to worry, this is a topic that we've covered previously on the channel. So if there's anything that we're covering in this video about build systems that you don't quite understand, check down in the description of the video where you'll find a playlist that will tell you everything you need to know about build systems. And maybe while you're heading down there, you might want to use those buttons to thumb, subscribe, and share, and ring the bell notification icon so you'll know when other great tutorials become available on the channel. Broadly speaking, there are three common problems that you might run into if you're trying to run a Python program on Sublime Text. The first of those, running an interactive program, is something that Sublime Text 4 has not resolved. You still need to use a third-party package for that. I still highly recommend Terminus, and there's still a video linked down in the description of the video that'll tell you how to set that up if you're unfamiliar and like to do something like that. The second most common problem might occur to you if you happen to be using Linux or Mac OS, and it has to do with Python version differences, because those operating systems ship with a version of Python pre-installed. Usually it's Python version 2, but you're probably writing Python code expecting Python version 3. Version 2 and version 3 of Python are not compatible with each other, and that means that something has to be done to make sure that scripts that you write will run in Python version 3, and scripts that are already existing on the system that were there before you installed Python will use the older version, and there could be a little bit of a problem doing that from Sublime Text. The other problem that you might have, the third most common problem, would be if you happen to be using Python on Windows, because on that operating system, Python isn't installed by default, and it's up to you to install it yourself. And there's a box that you have to check while you're installing it to make sure that the operating system as a whole and Sublime will be able to find Python and be able to execute it. And if you forget to check that box, then you could run into potential problems. Fortunately, though, Sublime Text 4 resolves all of those problems. To see how, let's do a side-by-side comparison with Sublime Text 3's build system on the left and Sublime Text 4's build system on the right. Over on the left, you can see that the build system always executes a program named Python, which is generally Python version 2 if you happen to be on Linux and Mac OS, and Python version 3 on Windows. So if you happen to be in the first camp of people that are expecting this to execute Python version 3 and you're on Linux or Mac OS, this is probably not the build system that you want to have happen. And if you're on Windows and you have installed Python but you forgot to check that box, then although Python is the correct application to run, Windows won't be able to find it unless you add it to the path. So there's extra stuff that you have to do there as well. These problems are resolved if we look in the build system over on the right-hand side, because we can see that the build now executes Python 3 by default in both the main build and in the variant. And that means that on Linux and on Mac OS, the correct version of Python will be executed. Now, there's a platform-specific key in both of these parts of the build to do something specific for Windows. And here, it executes a program named Py. This is something that the Python installer will put directly into the Windows directory, which is always on your path. And when you run this program, it will find and execute the appropriate Python. So if you're a Linux or Mac OS user and expecting to use Python 3, this build will work for you. And if you're on Windows expecting Python to build and you didn't check that box to put this on the path, this build will still work for you. Now, with that said, if you happen to be using Windows, there are a couple of problems that you might encounter using this new default build system. One of those is that not all distributions of Python include the Py helper. For example, Miniconda doesn't. So if you happen to be using that in Sublime Text 3, this would have worked just fine for you. In Sublime Text 4, it's trying to execute something that doesn't exist, and it causes a weird problem that you don't expect because everything used to work perfectly fine before. The other problem relates to how the new build uses command, whereas the old one used to use shell command. Under Windows, command in a build system tells Windows to execute the program but not allow it to open any extra windows, which means if you're trying to run a program that does open an extra window, say a graph that you're trying to plot or a game that you're trying to create with Pygame, then your program will run, but it won't be able to display anything in a window. And that can be disconcerting as well. Just from this brief discussion, it's clear that Sublime can't provide a one-size-fits-all default build because different people run different tools on different platforms in different ways. It has to be something that will work for the majority of people, and other people might still have to make some changes depending on their setup. Fortunately, those changes are very easy to make, and it goes a little something like this. First, you use the view package file command from the command palette and enter the text Python build and find and select the default Python build file. It'll look a little something like this. Select all this text and copy it to the clipboard. Then you can close this tab, use Tools, Build System, New Build System from the menu in order to create a new stub. Replace all of the text in that one with the text that you copied originally, and now you have the basis for your own build system. And here are the changes you can make for something like this. If you happen to want to run Python version 2 instead of Python version 3, then you can change the Python 3s to Python 2, and everything will work for you. If you happen to be using Miniconda or something that doesn't have the Py helper and you're on Windows, then you can modify the Windows sections of this so that they use Python instead of Py, and that would resolve that particular problem. And if you're trying to run a program that opens a graphical window of some sort, then all you have to do is in the top level part of the build, enter the text shell true, just like this. This tells the underlying system that while it is supposed to execute this program and let it run, it should still allow it to create a window where otherwise it wouldn't. And then your program will work exactly the way you like. And all you have to do is save this file. Now, when you hit save, Sublime's going to offer a default location for this. Make sure that you put this somewhere inside of your user package, and make sure that its extension is Sublime-build. Not all operating systems will apply the extension by default. And if it doesn't have that extension, Sublime's not going to know what it is. But you can name this thing anything you like. I recommend something that will allow you to know what it is. For example, Python custom, and you're good to go. Now you can choose this build system from the Tools Build System menu if you want to select it directly, or the next time you run a Python program, Sublime will ask you to select the version of Python that you should be using, choose the build that is the name of the one that you selected, and your build will continue to run, and everything is great. And hopefully you found this video great as well. And if you did, please use those buttons down below to thumb, subscribe, and share as you deem appropriate, and we'll let you know when new videos become available on the channel, which happens on a weekly basis. And until the next week, this is ODAT Nerd asking you to please have a sublime day.